Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're watching um, and when you're watching, indeed. So, my name is John Barnes, and I've spent many years watching, playing, discussing, thinking about football. Um, and I've been asked to critique the Premiership top four in what's a really fascinating season lining up with I think each team coming at things from a very different angle as to where we are now, but also in terms of their expectations and aspirations at the start of the season. So I think it's a really fascinating juxtaposition of the teams. We're also at that stage of the season where a lot of people are giving out trophies and jumping to their conclusions. So I thought I was asked to sort of give my thoughts on that so here we are. Um, I think probably the best place to start on this is with the champions, Manchester City. You know, they've won four in a row, six out of the last seven, as well as plenty of other trophies alongside that. Um, this isn't a fluke. There's not many teams in English football history that have really dominated for an extended period of time. I think you've got probably Aston Villa at the end of the 1800s, Arsenal in the 30s, Liverpool in the 70s and 80s, United in the 90s, and then City now. Other than that, there's not really been that extended. Despite all of the amazing teams there's been, Man City are one of those handful of teams that's really dominated a period of time, and I think this is something that um, can easily be forgotten with how quickly information shared these days. And they've had a rough run of games. Let's be clear. This isn't something that they're used to. Losing so many games in a row, going 3-0 up with a few minutes left and drawing 3-3 in the Champions League. This isn't what City are used to. Um, and they did win their last game fairly comfortably. So potentially back to winning ways, but who knows? They do need to string um, some results together. Get some back to back wins, and really overcome the fragility that they've been shown recently. Because it wasn't just results; the performances were not what we've come to expect from City. And they're bound to still be fragile at the moment, which they're more than capable of overcoming. It seems to be that every season at this sort of stage, people are writing them off, saying that they're over, they're finished, they won't do this, da da da, and then come May, they pull the wool over everyone's eyes, and guess what? They're lifting lots of silverware. So there's no guarantees of these things, but we've seen this movie before. I think a big factor of that is the Roger injury. If you look at the since Rodri's been a real first team staple for Man City, um, when he misses games, they do drop a considerable amount of points compared to their usual standards. But often Rodri's only out for. I think what's interesting is Rodri's usually only out for relatively short spells. A handful of games here and there, maybe a suspension, something like that, or a few weeks perhaps at the most. This doesn't seem to have these long extended periods out, and he's racked up huge amounts of games. So I think one of the things with that dynamic is he's in the team, then he's out for a short bit of time, and then he's back in the team. So there's not been that requirement to have a huge tactical shift to cater for Rodri's absence, because it doesn't happen that often. Um, so we've seen since Rodri's injury that Man City have been dropping a lot of points. The performances haven't been where perhaps people might expect, but they do have what this does, though. It gives them a chance to juggle the squad a bit to find a way to overcome this, and they've got phenomenal players. There isn't necessarily another Rodri in the world they can just pop in. So that that there isn't a direct replacement. But they've got some really good players. They've got tactical genius in Pep to try and find the right solutions. And that could be working with two midfield players to cover Rodri, perhaps double pivot with some of the more sort of defensive minded players that they have. Um, yeah, that may then free up the likes of KDB to play a bit more forward, or Silva to play a little bit more of an attacking role, something like that. I'm not going to try and second guess that too much because that's another video in itself. But the point is that you look at the resources they've got. There is an opportunity to cover for that to a degree, and still have a very effective side. And I think if you look at having a fit Kevin De Bruyne, a fit Erling Haaland, these can cover an awful lot of problems up. It's a bit like in boxing terminology where you've got a heavy hitter and they say that someone like a Deontay Wilder, he's got that eraser. In his prime, he had that eraser. Whatever mistakes they made, that power could just take the win. And I think with KDB and Haaland, it's a little bit like that knockout power that they've got. Obviously, that also relies on the defence tightening up as well because they've been shipping quite a few goals compared to usual. So, and I think the balance has been really affected by Rodri not being there because he does a lot going forward, or a lot in terms of their build up, but also a lot defensively, and to stop the need to defend. So I think it's about getting that balance right. But they've certainly got the players to be, and the players and the manager to be able to find a solution. Um, there is the backdrop of that where they have got some of their players are getting obviously players are all getting older, but some of their players are sort of hitting the latter stages of their career. Kevin De Bruyne, for example, is not playing as often as he once did. Carl Walker's maybe feeling the effects of Father Time just a little bit as well. So there's a few potential issues around that. They've also got a lot of youth coming through and a lot of players that they've signed and bought in um, over the last couple of years that maybe haven't been the stars of the show as such, but are hugely talented players as well. So how Pep balances this off and finds the strongest composite output is really going to be key to City's season. And I think you've got to look at this as a really big few weeks for them. They've shown this fragility recently, and we're coming into that busy stage of the season where, for a lot of teams, injuries bite. You've got to juggle the resources around, and Man City have the added a challenge that they've got that fragility. They need to build their confidence. String results together whilst they're maybe on a low ebb. And that's a challenge. Every great team's time comes to an end. But they've done this high wire act so many times that you can't really. I think it's foolish to expect that coming, but it will come one day. Whether that's today, we don't know. But I think if City have answered this challenge so many times, they've every time this part of the season they get written off. One time there will be a time when they're not able to come back. We saw it before, but when Liverpool romped away with the league before it broke up, and it was kind of all over by the shouting. So there's big challenges for City, but they've done it before. I think it's way too early to write them off, despite the fact that many people seem to be doing so. And some of them at the end of the season will probably claim that they were backing City all along, and we know how that worked. Which brings us nicely on to brings us nicely on to the league leaders, Liverpool. And they built up a big lead for this time part of the season, which was really interesting how they've done that. So they started off with some, obviously coming into the new season with a new manager, no real signings, or certainly not to come into the squad straight away. And I think there was some negativity around that, and looking at what Arne Slot said about wanting to see the squad first, almost as an excuse, and then they had some comparatively easy games to start with, which built the confidence, got their style of play, and people were saying wait till they come up against other teams, which they've done now. They played some good sides out there. And they keep passing these tests with flying colours. There's a lot of games that they're outplaying the opposition, considerably and playing really well. Um, there's also been other games where they've been outplayed. They've managed to take, for the most part, they've managed to take something from those games. By hook or by crook, they've done that, and that's real testament um, to the players and the manager and how quickly they've gelled together. um, excuse me. um, and what they've done as well, I think, is alongside that, they really managed games to conserve the energy. So you had the Klopp style, which was frantic, really great to watch. I think they're a little they've adapted a way whereby they can take the foot off the gas slightly and cruise through games a little bit more easily, which could bear fruits as the season develops as well. And alongside that, they've been so good in the Champions League. Build up a lot of points. Perhaps they can, that last group stage game, they might be able to rest some players. Maybe one or two games. Two games might be a big ask because the where you finish within the top eight will also affect you. Not so you have the top eight, which don't then play the next two games. But alongside that, where you finish in the top eight can also affect your seeding moving forward. So one game certainly, maybe two. That they can rest and rotate a little bit. In the Champions League, they've got no African Nations Cup, which is a big thing with with players like Mo Salah and how good he's been this season. And I think having built up this lead, that they've got this busy period coming up. They had a few, couple of injuries here and there. I think that in the defence they've had to juggle things a little bit, obviously with Alisson as well. But with this hectic period coming up, it can do funny things to all teams, particularly if you've got a big lead. And I think Liverpool have bought themselves a situation where they can afford to drop a couple of points and have a little bit of a blip before stretching their legs again into the new year. If that happens, there's no suggestion that will, but they've built up that cushion to be able to do so. And obviously, you then start to look at the sort of psychology behind that. But I think you'd much rather have the points in the bag and be able to afford a wobble than if you look at the other teams. If they had a 5 or 6 point wobble, it's far more damaging than if Liverpool did. And I think you have to look at some of the adversities. So they've been playing for a large part of the season without Alisson, who is absolutely phenomenal over the last sort of the time he's been at Liverpool. He's been generally the best or just about the best keeper in the world. He's been right up in that conversation. I think with Kelleher, he's fantastic. Arguably the second best, the best second choice keeper in the league. Man City have a claim for that as well. But and I think he's phenomenal. He's has the potential to be a number one at a big club. But the one thing I'd say with Kelleher, as good as he's been, I think he suffers from that thing that a lot of very good second choice keepers do when they know their second choice. They come in, play fantastic, but after an extended period, sometimes just a couple of mistakes just creep in a little bit. And we saw one against Newcastle recently. On its own, that's not anything to sort of kill him over. But we see this, and it could be one or two things. One, it could be that we perceive the mistake in a way we wouldn't do with a first choice goalie. The other is that these things sort of come in when you lose the adrenaline of or the novelty of being that number one, and you start to analyze things a little bit more. And I think we've seen that with Kelleher with the longer periods, and these things aren't it's not making him a bad goalie. We just see these sometimes creep in a little bit after he's been playing a few games, and it will be interesting to see how that pans out because Alisson's injuries in the last couple of seasons have really picked up. I think he's missed something like 30 games since the start of last season, which that's a big chunk for a goalkeeper to be out. But as I say, Kelleher's fantastic. There's not a huge drop off there, and even with the odd mistake, it's not having Allison there, but it's I think as good as you're going to get from a number two, and potentially could be a future number one, depending on what happens with Mamadashvili as he comes in. Um, I think with Liverpool as well, there's the something that feels critical is the fitness of their big players. So we mentioned the African Nations Cup, and look at how Salah's performing at the moment, and Van Dijk as well seems to be coming back something close to his best, and a real influence on the team outside of his own performances, more so than I think previously, even with in terms of influence. So um, I think that's really important. They perform at that level, or continue to perform at that high level. There's no signs of them showing their age, and they don't necessarily. It's not necessarily the case that they will do, but who knows? Um, but along, with the backdrop of this is that they've got that both Salah and Van Dijk are coming out of contract at the end of the season. From January, they can sign pre-contracts with other clubs. Trent is obviously in the same boat as well. And I think how this is managed is going to be really interesting with Liverpool's season. So, this could be positive or negative. So, for example, if you get into the second half of the season and these players start signing pre-contracts elsewhere, do their performance levels drop because they're thinking about something else? Do they want to end on a big hurrah and then their performances stay the same or even go up? Um, do if the contracts aren't signed and there's no news, does that start niggling away at things? Does it affect dressing room morale? We don't know. And then there could actually be the positives. So it may be that you've got a contract signed by Van Dijk or Salah, whoever it might be. You've got that signed, it's in your pocket, you haven't announced it, and then you get into February and Liverpool maybe lose a game in the league, lose a first leg or draw a first leg in the Champions League at Anfield, get knocked out of one of the cups, and all of a sudden there's a bit of negativity around the club. And what happens? You announce that Salah signed a new contract, or Van Dijk, or whoever, and all of a sudden that negativity is turned to positive, and we've seen that happen before as well. So that's going to be an interesting dynamic to see in the second half of the season how that pans out. And then you've also got the Arne Slot factor. He's done phenomenally well, and I don't think you can. I don't think it could have gone really any better for him. He's taken what Klopp was doing, put his own touch on it, and it's phenomenal. And it'll be interesting to see how that develops as analysts at other clubs start to look at what Arne Slot's done, how he's done it, and what they can do to counteract that. Sometimes I think we saw it with Ange Postecoglou last season, albeit at a different level, where people worked him out and very quickly there was a huge drop off. Now, I'm not suggesting that that's going to happen to Liverpool to that degree, but what happens when these clubs start working this out? Is it that people start running harder, more physical through the midfield, which seems to be a slight Achilles heel for them? Well, they seem to have struggled against that backdrop a little bit more. Powerful running in the midfield, physical midfield as well. That may be something that people start to target. There may be other things that analysts pick up on. So that'll be interesting. That doesn't also that's also not suggesting that Arne Slot won't have a way of negating that, and he's got the next trick up his sleeve. But how that pans out is going to be really fascinating. And what happens, what happens when Liverpool have their blip, which is almost certain that they will. What happens then? Will they be 15 points clear in March by then? Will they be, going to second place? How does all this happen, and when does it happen? These things are really going to be interesting, I think, with Liverpool's season and how they develop as that goes along. But for the first third of the season, I think hugely over and above expectations. We then move into second place, where we have Chelsea, and this is really, really interesting, I think. So we look at Chelsea, and they're coming in as the plucky underdogs. And the last 20 years of sort of Chelsea's history, I don't think anyone's really given them the title of plucky underdogs in the way that this is happening. And they don't have sort of pressure or expectation at the start of the season, which I think's helped them create a bubble around what they're doing, and just focus on internal matters in a way. And but I think having spent over £1 billion to be the plucky underdogs just shows you where football is these days. And I think perhaps the other three teams in the top four as well, where they are, where the money is in general. I think that's a really interesting juxtaposition. And I think the other thing with the league as well, because they're in the Conference League, and they've almost got a squad for the Conference League and a squad for the league. So this has meant that the first team players, Cole Palmers and people like that, they're not playing Champions League, so they're playing one game a week, always fresh, always performing, um, and they've really benefited from that. So, and how that how that plays out as they go later into the Conference League, if they take it seriously, do they go long in the other cups as well? Do they play the first teams in those cups? And how players react to that is interesting. But they've kind of got the miles saved in their legs from this early part of the season. They might, if you compare that to the Champions League sides, they're going to have players that may be playing eight less games in the first part of the season. They played eight less games for that kind of first 11, if you like, and that's big over a season. That's you're probably looking at about 15% of your entire season, just in those games. So that's that's a lot of miles in the legs, and also the fringe players playing in that regular league can potentially be up to speed in a way that isn't so easy if you're having to play Champions League. So I think that's an interesting place for them to be, um, and that they have got that depth in the squad where that Conference League helps manage minutes between the kind of the first team and the second team. I know it's not that it's not as clear as that, but you take my meaning. The players that are playing most games and the players that are playing least, and it keeps people happy, keeps them fresh, keeps them motivated, and we've seen that Chelsea are they've been a lot of the times destroying the teams that they expect to beat. They've had some really good really good results, really good performances. They've scored a lot of goals against some teams. I think that's the sort of thing that builds up confidence, particularly amongst the forwards as well. If you're getting on the score sheet, getting assists, part of the build up, um, getting that confidence and assurance. And you look at the difference in Nicholas Jackson, for example, this year compared to last. Not necessarily, not so much in numbers, but in terms of how he's handling himself on the pitch, how he looks, sort of the confidence, the way he's addressing the ball in situations. I think that's you can see these things coming from results as well. And it's a young side, so that level of confidence is going to be important. Those sort of dips and sort of peaks and troughs of confidence are really important with young players. So I think that's something to watch as the season comes on. Um, the flip side to that, though, is they've not really had impressive results against the other members of the top four. A couple of draws here and there, and a few defeats. So how that pans out, can they get kind of these wins against the big teams? That could make all the difference in this season. If you look at Arsenal a couple of seasons ago, they couldn't get a win against anyone in the top six, let alone the top four. And now they don't seem to lose those games at all. And I think seeing how Chelsea develop that is going to be that could be really, really important for them, as well. Whether they become a permanent fixture amongst the teams that were probably more fancied at the start of the season, or whether they come back towards the teams in the next bracket below. And I think it's interesting. It could go either way. They're certainly looking closer to the top three than they are obviously they're second, so they're looking more than closer. But it looks like they're closer to being a member of that top four than they are to being a member of the teams outside of that. But again, it's a very short sample survey, a third of the way into the season. So, and there is a lack of experience or a lack of big game experience amongst the players. You know, that proven done it time and time again. If you look at Chelsea teams of the past, that was one of the biggest things they had. That these were players that had been to the well, come back, and they knew the way that they knew that map really well. So that's an interesting dynamic, and you only get experience by earning it. You can buy it, but they're not going that way. So. Um, and with that experience, if they go further in the cups and they start playing 2-3 games a week for an extended period, how does that affect them? How do they manage that? Are they able to go again 3 days later and 3 days later and 3 days later and so on and so forth? The Thursday Sunday thing, if they're playing late in the late stages in the Conference League. I think I personally always feel that's slightly overplayed. I think it's more of a quality issue than Thursday Sunday. However, there does seem to be something around that, so I can't entirely rule it out. It's just my opinion. And so that'll be interesting to see how they manage that. But they've set themselves up nicely with good points total, a lot of freshness in the legs, a lot of players that are on the right trajectory in terms of confidence and performance as well. And they've got a bit of a free hit because the expectation wasn't there to start with. So that can make them dangerous in the second half of the season, albeit they're unblooded at that level. So we don't know, and that can make them dangerous, or it could implode. But I think if you said Champions League qualification next season at the start of the season, they would have took that, albeit whether they pass FFP and things like that. I'm not getting into that today. In the same way, City's court case and stuff, I'm not getting into all of that today. I think there's too many variables on that. That's a conversation for another time. But I think if you look at the general progress of Chelsea, I think they'll be very happy with their start to the season. Then you've kind of got Arsenal, who they've had a really tough start to the season in a couple of ways. So they've had kind of a lopsided season when it comes to the big away games that they faced at the start of the season, particularly when it comes after an international tournament. So I've always been of the mindset, you want to play. If you could choose your ideal start to the season, you'd want to get all of your biggest away games out of the way to start with, and then have a much easier run at the end. The caveat being not necessarily after an international tournament, but I think they've had those games. You've got to play what's in front of you, and they maybe lacked a little bit of consistency and just need to settle into a rhythm a bit. And there's been, I think, a few things around this. So there's been the fixtures. They've had a couple of times where they've had maybe 3 away games in a week and lots of travel and big games back to back and things like that. But then they've also had the red cards impacting the games as well. And you can argue whether what the rights and wrongs of those are. The fact is they've had those red cards, which impacts them for that game, but also the following game as well, where they've had to juggle the squad and combined with injuries has caused issues. But I think something bigger than that is it's created a lot of unnecessary noise around the club or around the fixtures. So sometimes even the games that are against the teams that are maybe expected to be in the bottom half that would normally would go unremarked have turned into bigger occasions because of the suspension, because of the noise around these cards, and everyone's talking about that. So I think there's been a lot of noise and a lot of energy expended around some of these games, and it's made for quite a turbulent start to the season, actually. So, so I think there's an interesting dynamic there, and they've kind of they don't seem to be taking their chances from open play especially well compared to what we've seen in the past, and also I think they've been getting punished for mistakes at the back as well. So there's things at both ends that they've done better over the last couple of seasons. They have built up that experience over the last couple of seasons. Haven't got over the line, but they've built up some good experience there. So I think that's something that it's certainly something that they'll need to rectify, and they'll be looking at how to do that. But we know that they can do that, and they have got that in the locker to be able to get that right. And there's also the backdrop of the set pieces. They're absolutely phenomenal at set pieces, and we've spoken about big players and how they can affect games and things like that. But set pieces don't get injured. Set pieces. People were talking about this as is it sustainable, and it's been happening for a while now. This is sustainable. Obviously, things can get stopped. Things do evolve, but there's no reason that should stop. And I think you've got the goals that come from it, but also it's a way of managing the game. You get corners, you get deliveries in. There's a mental tension to the opposition. It tires them out, affects concentration, gets the crowd involved. So I think that's the negative discussions around the set piece have been massively overplayed. I don't really understand how this is a thing. Look at some of the finest moments in sort of English football that have come from that. I mean, look at the Man United winning the treble. Or David Beckham. Had all these amazing things. Look at the Chelsea teams of the past, and even Arsenal teams of the past. There's these things aren't new, and it's a big advantage if you've got that. So I think that's been overplayed. But if you look at Arsenal's sort of direction of travel, it's a really big month or two for them because they've had this up and down start. They've had the good, the bad, and the ugly. But over the next sort of month or two, they've got a run of games where they're favourite pretty much in each game, certainly until the new year. And alongside that, they don't really travel. They stay in London until January 2025. Even then, the first travel is to Brighton. There's a home draw in the FA Cup, albeit it's to Man United, so you're not going to be able to rotate players in the same way that you could against Hamworth and teams like that. But actually, they've got this run of games, and I think what we see is that there's big pressure on them to deliver. The games that they'll be expected to win, and they do need to win those games. They need to put together a big run of back to back to back to back to back wins. A little bit like City in a way, albeit that the confidence and performance levels have ebbed and flowed in a slightly different way there. But they've got that real pressure on to deliver consistent, solid results, build that confidence up, and just click into the groove. Like I say, very similar to City in many ways, albeit the confidence probably isn't quite as fragile. And also the flip side is, they maybe haven't done the things that City have done as well. So that also plays in. But they've got a real powerful squad. I think these next few games, it'll be interesting to see how the squad's managed, because looking at it from the outside in, it looks as though they need to give more minutes to some players and less minutes to some players. There needs to be that kind of balancing off where, Jurrien Timber at the moment is probably the most important player in Arsenal's squad, because if he goes there, then Thomas Partey's probably playing it right back. Obviously, if Tomiyasu comes back, or Ben White comes back, that changes. But for now, that's really important. But I think you've got the people on the fringes that need minutes, need to click into gear, and whether that's up front with Sterling and Jesus, or whether that's getting the likes of Tomiyasu back to give that cover at the back, or perhaps Jorginho as well as another one, Ethan Nwaneri. There's these players that just you want to be sort of blooding them and getting them up to speed, whilst also taking some of the maybe some of the other players that maybe want to just going to get a little bit overworked if they're not careful. And I think generally you've had people like Rice and Gabriel and Saliba that have been out here and there for one reason or another. A few players that haven't gone with international duty, so they're maybe not as heavily raced as they would otherwise be. Even Saka and Odegaard as well. But very quickly over this period, they can rack up the minutes and sort of get close to being overworked. So balancing that's off is going to be really important. And if Arsenal can get that right, that puts them in a fantastic position for the second half of the season to really kick on. And I think I was looking at the fixtures for all of these teams for this weekend, and obviously Everton Liverpool has been cancelled today due to the weather conditions in the UK, which it's the last Liverpool derby, Merseyside derby at Goodison Park before they moved to a stadiums, before they changed to new stadiums. Everton derailed Liverpool last season. You'd expect Liverpool, but strange things happen, and maybe moving that back to later in the season can just magnify the pressure on that game. So that's quite an interesting development there. We saw a couple of years ago, slightly different circumstances, but where the Queen Elizabeth II passed away, and the Arsenal versus Man City game was moved to the second half of the season. And when it would have been played originally, Arsenal were banging form and City were out of form. It was moved to later in the season when City were banging form and Arsenal were out of form. City won, and actually the gap was 5 points, which if Arsenal had won rather than City, that would have been a 6 point swing. Now it's ifs and buts, and I'm not saying that was definitive, but moving the game Goodison Park to later in the season, we could see funny things happen with that. If Liverpool are going long in lots of tournaments, it may be difficult to squeeze that in potentially. I suspect it may be a case that Liverpool finish top 8 in the Champions League group stage, and there's going to be a window open to put that into one of those games if there's not FA Cup ties and things like that. So you probably can put that into that sort of February-ish timeline. But who knows? These things have a habit of building up. So that'll be an interesting one to watch. You've got Palace v City. City have dropped points against City. City have dropped points against Palace occasionally from time to time. You'd expect City to go on and win this game, and they really do need to. I think less so from the gap perspective. That's important. They can't keep falling further behind. But I think in terms of that confidence, having got the win last time out, fairly comfortable win last time out, backing that up with a good result against Palace, who themselves have improved recently a little bit from what was a really bad start. But yeah, it's a big game for City. But you would expect them to go on and do the business in that game. And if not, I think it's going to be interesting to see how they react to that, because they have been a bit more rattled than we've previously seen at points this season. If they got Spurs v Chelsea, and this is just such a Spursy game, isn't it? Who knows what's going to happen here? We saw last time with 9 men, Spurs were holding a line in Chelsea's half, not even defending the halfway line. We've seen lots of goals and fights and all sorts in this fixture over the recent years. Who knows what could happen, but there's got to be goals. Surely, I can't be tempting fate too much to predict there's going to be lots of goals in this. And then you've got Arsenal v Fulham, or Fulham v Arsenal, sorry. And, you could argue that Fulham cost Arsenal the title last year. They took, they got the 2 results against Arsenal. One where they came back from behind, and one where they just drew the better side and took those points. And that was the difference between Arsenal winning and not winning. So it's a really slippery banana skin for Arsenal. Fulham as well. I think they're 6th this season at the moment. Really good side playing well. So it's a really slippery banana skin for Arsenal. And if it's kind of a game they can't really afford to lose points in. I think with how things are going, but there's a really big advantage if they can get those points as well. And I think what with Liverpool not playing and the other 3 teams playing, how that if they all win and they reduce the gap, albeit Liverpool have a game in hand, how that plays out in the sort of the month or so ahead is going to be really interesting. And what that means, that when the Everton game gets penciled in, what that game in hand means. Are they doing that from a position where they're 7 points ahead like they are now? Are they doing it from a position where they're level or in about or amongst it, or is it something where they're behind, need to win that game because they're not top? So there's some really interesting dynamics around this week, and we're going to see this for weeks and weeks to come. There's lots of twists and turns, and I think all in all, for the rest of the season, there's going to be lots and lots of ups and downs for every single team that mentioned today. and it's way too early to make any conclusive predictions about these matters. You know, I think you don't have to watch too many seasons of Premier League football to realise that. But you know, Liverpool's start has really put the pressure on the others to not make any mistakes. You know, the the level of tolerance for mistakes amongst those teams with this gap is significantly reduced. Um, I think if they can all win this weekend, that then starts to just pivot the dynamic slightly. But um, you know, Liverpool have done fantastically well to get where they are. You know, we've got the sort of coming into the busy December, Christmas, New Year period as well. So you know, then you've got this always has its ups and downs, and how squad fitness and squad management is really important in this period. You know how the cup ties pan out is crucial is really important as well. And I think if you look at it, there's three. I think there's is it Accrington, Stanley, Tamworth, and Salford are three of the draws, and then Manchester United's the other. So that obviously that affects how you can rotate things. There's the League Cup games as well, and it's kind of a little bit give and take with that because Arsenal play Palace and then play Palace again. So, you know, potentially they can make an advantage there, the others can't, but then get that taken away for the FA Cup ties or third round FA Cup ties. So these are all really interesting dynamics that I think we can't take anything for granted. If I were to make some predictions, and they're fairly they're fairly loose predictions. I don't think there's any sort of hot takes here, but I think what we will see is that the gaps will open and close between these teams as the um, as we get into the over the next few months, as we get towards the run to the business end before the fun really starts to begin in earnest at the back end of the season. You know, those sort of championship rounds in March, April, May time, where the real stuff happens. But how the teams position themselves in the run to that's going to be really fascinating. So let me know your thoughts below on this because there's so many things with this. You can't even in a 40-minute video you can't cram it all in. 10 minutes on each team. But yeah, let me know your thoughts and if there's anything that we should expand upon. Because I'm going to be creating avenues for genuine audience participation and coming to join me on this one as the community grows. So, do subscribe to the channel if you'd like to be part of that. That way I can keep you posted as we develop these initiatives moving forward. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on that. If there's anything else you'd like me to discuss or any points you agree with, disagree with, it's good to have these conversations. And I know it's football, but let's try and keep it at least respectful, if not respectful, at least constructive. I don't mind being insulted, but at least have a good point that you're gonna raise with that makes me think, rather than just shouting a name or something. I think hopefully we're past that stage. But like I say, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Let me know, and hopefully, we can speak more in person as the channel develops. So thanks everyone for your time, and strap in for a fascinating race. Thanks everyone. Bye bye.